just a little street where old friends meet.
Welcome to Detroit, the birthplace of the United States Conference of Mayors and the site of an exciting 69th Annual Conference of Mayors. I want to share with you a few facts and a bit of history of how we all got here. In 1932, in this city, Detroit, Michigan, there was an incredible mayor. His name was Frank Murphy. There were 100,000 people in this city unemployed. And in this nation, there were 14 million unemployed. Soup lines stretched for blocks, homeowners were unable to pay taxes, and veterans were selling apples on the streets of Detroit. So what did the mayor do? He formed a task force to do something about Detroit, but there was not enough help here. The private sector helped, but it was meager results. The state of Michigan was unwilling to provide direct relief to this city. So Mayor Murphy sounded the alarm, and he asked for mayors to come to Detroit. So on the 1st of June in 1932, Mayor Murphy hosted 29 mayors coming from around the United States. When Mayor Murphy presided over this first meeting, he said, "The breakdown in the economy is being borne disproportionately by the cities. The hour is at hand for the federal government to cooperate." The mayors throughout this nation, and especially here in Detroit that day, were at their wits' end, and they feared time was running out. Listen to what Boston Mayor James Curley had to say. "Unless action is taken at an early date, the welfare of the people is not only in jeopardy, but the continued existence of the nation is problematical." After much discussion that day, and you can imagine because you've been to these meetings now for many years, the mayors, as they always do, came up with a plan, and that combined federal relief assistance with national funded public works. And the proposal was a $5 billion prosperity loan program for public works and a change in the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to allow it to make direct loans to cities. New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker said, "The federal government does not have to look into suffering faces. We have to. The federal government does not wander through darkened halls of hospitals and poorhouses and municipal lodging houses. They don't know, and it's up to me and you to tell them what is happening in America." After spending the morning debating and arriving at their congressional proposals, the mayors turned their attention to forming a permanent body that could represent them in the national political arena. The debate continued, and in the afternoon session, the Detroit Mayor Murphy stated, "Many of us have felt that there ought to be some permanent organization of the cities to study and inquire into city problems to the end that they will be constantly improving municipal government." He found his fellow mayors enthusiastic about the idea. And so the New Orleans mayor, T.S. Walmsley, summed up the feelings by saying, "They, Washington, D.C., is not going to pay any attention to anything I as an individual may express, or Mayor Frank Murphy as an individual may express. Where you have concerted action, where you have the power and the influence of an entire association of mayors back of you, then you have something." Mayor Murphy was authorized to appoint a committee to be responsible for perfecting such an organization. And so the mayors left Detroit the next day, and a delegation of 7 mayors came to Washington, D.C. to make their case to Congress and the President. The mayors went to work, and they got Congress to pass the Emergency Relief and Construction Act of 1932, which gave the Reconstruction and Finance Corporation the authority to make loans or contracts to finance public works projects in cities. On February 17th of 1933, the following year, the mayors gathered at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. to put the final touches of this new organization. Mayor Murphy of Detroit came prepared with a proposed constitution for the United States Conference of Mayors. The organization was to have an elected board with a president and a vice president, and its mandate was to improve city governments and to safeguard the interests, rights, and the privilege of cities as they may be affected by federal legislation. A membership fee was established. You know, we have to have dues. Guess what it was? A minimum fee of $25, how's that for a bargain, was charged for cities over 50,000 with an additional $5 for each additional 1,000 in population. The resolution was put forth by an outstanding mayor and a great founding father from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Mayor Dan Hone, and it was passed. The United States Conference was now a fact.
Our campaign slogan, Sissy.
Happy days are here again.
Following their meeting, the mayors went to work with their friend, the new President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They worked with President Roosevelt, and they got Congress to get major pieces of legislation passed as the National Industrial Recovery Act, PWA, Public Works, the Bureau of Public Roads, the Works Progress Administration, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, which provided jobs in rural and urban. Each step of the way with President Roosevelt, mayors were in the forefront, leading the charge to get these bills through Congress. In fact, in the presidential order establishing the WPA, the Conference of Mayors was named explicitly as the voice of city interest to sit alongside of business, labor, agriculture, and the banks. The Conference of Mayors played a role in helping our country through World War II. Mayor Fiorello La Guardia, the mayor of New York City, the Little Flower, he was then president of this conference. He served for 10 years, from 1935 to 1945. They prepared a report for the president outlining a program for civil defense for American cities. And so La Guardia, the mayor of New York himself, was actually appointed by the president as the director of the Office of Civil Defense, and he spent many, many hours in our headquarters on Jackson Place, Lafayette Square, serving as the president of the Conference of Mayors, but serving as an advisor to the President of the United States during this wartime. The Conference of Mayors became the national clearinghouse for civil defense materials, and the mayors were deluged with reports, pamphlets, announcements, and letters dealing with the country's civil defense effort. President Roosevelt was deeply grateful to the mayors, and you look in the history books, he and Mrs. Roosevelt were both letter writers. In every letter in our files, President Roosevelt refers to Mayor La Guardia. He says, "My dear Mr. President." It's very special, that relationship. In a letter written dated 1940 to Mayor La Guardia, President Roosevelt writes, "I cannot let the occasion of the 1940 annual conference of the United States Conference of Mayors pass without expressing to the chief executives of the major cities of our country my personal appreciation of the splendid cooperation which has been extended to the national government during the past few months." Let me just talk to you a little bit about Mayor La Guardia. He was a colorful national character. He read the funny papers to kids.
Now here, the first picture is the laundry wagon. It's a yellow laundry.
He did everything that was absolutely typical of a mayor of New York. From 1935 to 1945, he served as president of this organization. Now, all of you know that that's a long time, and all of you know the short life of a mayor. So the question was, how do we get rid of this guy after he served for 10 years, even we love him to death? So they came up with this idea in 1945 to give him a new car. And so at the dinner, at the board dinner in 1945, the story goes that the vice president of the organization stood up and said, "We'd like to give the outgoing president of this organization a new Cadillac." And the next morning, we had a new president. Men and women went to fight to make our country safe. So they came home, they wanted what every other person wants, and that is a place to live. They wanted housing.
President Truman takes another step forward in the emergency housing program as he signs a bill.
The 1946 Housing Act, which was supposed to guarantee housing for all Americans. We put the housing not in the inner city, but of course we started building in the ring of the outer city. And after that, we had something called the interstate highway system. It's very important that we understand the whole civil rights question and the history that this organization played. It took a young mayor named Hubert Humphrey who addressed the 1948 Democratic Convention, and he expressed outrage at the segregation and the policy of the times in the North and the South.
In a new alliance for progress.
In 1963, President John F. Kennedy came to our annual meeting in Honolulu. In his remarks, President Kennedy said to the mayors, "I am here in short to discuss with you a problem which is not a local but national, not northern or southern, eastern or western, but a national problem, a national challenge. I am talking about the problem of civil rights. Federal action can help, but in the last analysis, what happens in Birmingham or Chicago or Los Angeles or Atlanta depends in large measure upon the leadership of those communities." The mayors left Honolulu and became actively involved in pushing for civil rights. I take special note of the fact that we had a white businessman mayor from Atlanta, Georgia, who testified for Public Accommodations Act. The riots had begun in Rochester, in Newark, in Los Angeles, and throughout this nation.
The Great Society is a place where every child can find knowledge.
From that relationship with President Johnson came the Federal City Partnership, Model Cities, Community Action, the Job Corps, Head Start, and other programs. The Great Society programs weren't just about money and economic development. They were about political leadership. And these programs enable blacks and other minorities to come up through the ranks of community organizations and fill leadership positions. The first African-American mayor, Carl Stokes, was elected mayor of Cleveland in 1967, followed by Richard Hatcher from Gary, Indiana. The white mayors welcomed the new African-American mayors with open arms. We didn't need to form a black caucus for these new mayors. They were readily accepted as part of our organization. In 1968, President Richard Nixon was elected president. It is to President Nixon's credit that he brought the mayors together and created some of the most exciting programs in his first term. We had people in the White House that helped us start the EPA. They helped form the Community Development Block Grant Program. We had general revenue sharing, $6 billion going to states, counties, and cities. We had the war on drugs. We had the war on cancer. And it was the mayors led by Republican mayor of New York City, John Lindsay. He was an international media star. He bonded with a group of mayors, men and women, and formed the Legislative Action Committee. This was 17 mayors that moved across this country over a 20-month period to showcase the need for federal help. He recently passed away, and we loved him very much. We learned about the break-in at the Democratic headquarters in 1972 at our annual meeting in New Orleans when Larry O'Brien, chairman of the Democratic Party, announced to us that a break-in had occurred at his offices in the Watergate building. So America first learned about Watergate when it appeared in the New Orleans Times-Picayune newspaper. It was a very politically charged time with accusations, finger-pointing, and we later learned that the United States Conference Mayors was on the enemy's list. Then all through this was the Vietnam War. Many mayors said that they could not govern because of the demonstrations.
There has been and continues to be opposition to the war in Vietnam.
A resolution was brought in by the mayor of San Leandro, Jack Maltesta. Maltesta challenged the big city mayors to be strong, and the nation's mayors went on record to support the McGovern-Hatfield Amendment, which was to bring the American troops home by December of that year. Under the leadership of New Orleans Mayor Moon Landrieu, the United States Conference of Mayors was faced with the question of how could we assist a nearly bankrupt New York City. It was a historical day when mayors came to Washington from across this country and voted on September 29 to support federal legislation to help New York. Unfortunately, President Ford did not listen to us and decided not to help New York. But the mayors kept coming, and under the direction of Mayor Abe Beame, we continued to pursue the fight, and eventually help was given to the city of New York. When President Carter was elected, he immediately called the mayors in the White House, worked on something called the UDAG program, Urban Development Action Grants. He went to Camp David. Mayors went up there, they talked to him.
The president sits down. He had a yellow pad of paper, a pencil, and looked at this group of us who didn't know why we were there. He looked at us and he said, well, I'd like each of you individually to tell me what's wrong with America.
And he decided to make major shifts within his administration. So it was a very historical day when all of us went to the White House to see the President of the United States announce two mayors, New Orleans Mayor Moon Landrieu, former president of our organization, to be Secretary of HUD, and the young mayor from Portland, Oregon, Neil Goldsmith, to be Secretary of Transportation. Coming off a great accomplishment of having two mayors in the President's cabinet, we faced a new challenge with President Reagan and Bush, and we had to go on the defense, always trying to head off budget cuts, but the mayors were strong through that period, and many of those programs were saved, even though we lost $23 billion. We had the AIDS epidemic under President Reagan, and it was C. Everett Koop, the Surgeon General of the nation, that came forth with Dianne Feinstein to bring together an AIDS task force. But it was AIDS awareness which has saved thousands of lives. One of the fastest growing movements in the history that we saw was the women's political movement. We saw women getting elected mayor of these cities coming into the Conference of Mayors. But for some reason, the men were not voting the women in. And so it was Mayor Feinstein, the mayor of San Francisco, that formed the Women's Caucus. And since that time, things have changed. 1992 was a different time. Our country was in a recession. In January, we invited all the presidential candidates to our winter meeting, and they were presented with a 10-point plan that the mayors had adopted. And so President Clinton came in and bonded with the mayors on the whole question of making our cities safer. And so we had the crime bill and the COPS program and the community policing efforts. He decided in his administration, working with Secretary of HUD, Andrew Cuomo, that the President of the United States should each year establish a State of the Cities report. We had the most open White House, I think, in the history of the Conference of Mayors. My quote was, he came in as a governor and he went out as a mayor. At the White House, Conference President Brent Coles presented President Clinton the Distinguished Public Service Award of the United States Conference of Mayors, the highest award ever given by this organization. We have today President Bush. In the first 100 days, the President endorsed the Brownfields legislation, S-350. We're also working with President Bush on his faith-based initiatives. The history of this organization is rich, very rich, and no more so than the mayor himself, Richard J. Daley. If you want to talk about power and clout, you mention his name. You cannot imagine the power that this man had, but he was an humble person. We must also talk about Henry Meyer, the mayor of Milwaukee for 28 years. He coined the term national priorities. He said, we believe that there's enough money to go around. We also believe that money can be prudently deferred on space and military to help us with the incarceration of the poor. We must also mention again the women leaders. The first president, Helen Busalis from Lincoln, Nebraska. Ken Gibson, the first black president from Newark. Hernan Padilla, the first Hispanic president of our organization from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Mayor Coleman Young, a mayor of Detroit, Michigan. Within our organization, he helped establish the Urban Economic Policy Committee. Ernest Dutch Morial, the mayor of New Orleans, was president of the Conference of Mayors in the 80s. He helped to heal the political divisiveness which was taking place within our organizations. Democratic and Republican mayors were split over the makeup of the conference leadership. The Democrats would caucus and vote themselves in, and the Republican mayors were threatening to bolt the organization. Mayor Morial called me and said, "This is not going to happen on my watch." So we brought mayors to Chicago, and they came up with a plan where out of the 3 top offices, at least one will always be filled by a Republican. If you look at every great issue that has divided this country since the Great Depression, you will see mayoral involvement. We had the Depression, World War II, then we had civil rights, a Vietnam War that divided us, women's rights, riots in our country, AIDS, and we've just gone through this whole discussion on guns and gun safety. This organization has been a source of bringing together a consensus for a national debate working towards a solution. And so let's talk about today, which speaks to our future. Let's face it, let's realize it and accept it. Yes, today we see a renaissance of American cities, and it just didn't happen. Mayors have played an essential part of this phenomenon. The role of the mayor today is to be competitive nationally and internationally. With this entrepreneurial spirit tied to America's business, we will drive these metro economies and thus the national economy. And thanks to mayors in their cities, we will flourish with a new economy, with new cities, and indeed a new America for our people. There's the old worn cliche, the best is yet to come. As we begin our meeting here in Detroit, some 69 years after the first group came under the leadership of Mayor Frank Murphy, I know that our best years are indeed yet to come.
Wait till you see